Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of The Nest. Gee, we're away and running and thoroughly enjoying this new little enterprise we've got going, Drew Jones, and all the feedback from all the passionate Eagles fans, and another massive guest today. We've had Andrew Embley, we've had Scott Cummings. Now we've got a man, if you don't mind, who played 267 games for the club, won 2 premierships, 2 best and fairest, 3 All-Australians at the Eagles, and was captain as well from 99 until 2000. Drew Jones, I welcome you alongside one of the all-time legends of the West Coast Eagles in Guy Bluey McKenna. Guy, thanks so much for joining us on The Nest.
G'day, fellas. How are we?
Yep, never better.
Going really well, Bluey. Just awesome to have you on. You read that resume and you're almost taken aback. I mean, we sometimes get caught up with some of the greats that we have running around today, and then you look at that and you go, wow, I mean, there are some who set the bar stupidly high in terms of the West Coast Eagles, and it's so great to have you on to go through all of your career along with so many current issues around the West Coast Eagles, which we'll get onto at the moment, trade news and things like that. But let's take stock of the season as it is, Guy. I mean, what did you make of the Eagles campaign, and what do you make of where they are right now? How firmly in that premiership window is the club that you love so much?
Oh, look, they're certainly in the window. Obviously, Tim Kelly's recruitment is testament to that. Naturally, probably he didn't have the season. And again, I mean, it was a bizarre season, but I must say it was a bizarre season for all the clubs. So you can't say, that only affected West Coast. Having said that, I mean, you know, the travel and the hubs, all those sorts of things to get your head around that. Obviously, they needed to do that pretty quickly. It'd be fair to say that they didn't. So obviously that first initial part of the season, I think, left them sort of hemorrhaging, I reckon, a little bit. I mean, obviously they came back and rectified that, winning the games they did back at home. But suffice to say, and again, we went through it as well. I mean, there was the West Coast Eagles and there was the East Coast Eagles. The West Coast Eagles, fantastic at home, dominant. Can play the game in their surroundings really well, but then obviously faced with the challenges of travel and living in a hub, of course, and the game after game away, they came up well short. And again, if I remember back to my early days at West Coast, that was no different. We struggled away from home until we became a good team and a good enough team to win at any venue, any time and any conditions.
Was it a lost opportunity, Guy, this season, given Nick Nat-Nui All-Australian, he was injury-free, had a great pre-season. Josh Kennedy the same. Kelly coming to the club. It felt like they were primed.
Yeah, certainly. And again, probably one of the few clubs that were able to play a proportion of the season at home as they were able to. So I know it was obviously a lot smaller than, but it's no surprise that Port and Brisbane are in the finals, of course. Obviously, Adelaide were always going to struggle, of course, and obviously Gold Coast still a young crew. So they were the 4 teams that actually played the majority at home. So it's no wonder, given the window where Port and Brisbane are, that they're obviously 2 of the favourites going into the into preliminary final week. So West Coast are on the next run down. They certainly had some games at home, obviously, which they nailed. But, I just think with that recruiting, with Nick Nat back, the players you were talking about, but they certainly lost a couple of key players throughout the course of the season. And I think in a normal season, it takes you 2 or 3 weeks to get that momentum back and that style and get used to players and all that sort of stuff. But I must say, given the hub life, if you like, of football this year and the lack of opportunity to train, that was always going to be a bigger uptake, if you know what I mean, to get that continuity back. So, they were obviously just well short of where they needed to be, and obviously that's how the season ended.
Hey, Guy, I mean, you've been involved in several clubs since leaving the Eagles. Are you still passionate and emotional when you watch West Coast? Or has that changed a bit now because you've been linked to and involved with so many other clubs?
Oh, look, I think if you opened me up, I think I'd bleed blue and yellow, no question, because
Right.
there's 2 flags, and the time as a player and a coach there as well, and the fantastic relationships and all that sort of stuff. But I'm further removed from that than I am of obviously clearly Gold Coast, who is, mind you, that I've been away from them since 2014 now. So that's 6 years, but there's still a few familiar faces bobbing around there. So I've got a close connection to them. So if you ask me who I sit down and watch on the weekends, I would say Gold Coast. If I've already watched them, I would then default to West Coast, of course. But yeah, I don't get hung up on their, the wins and losses, if you know what I mean. But certainly keep an eye on them. And again, someone reminded me the other day that, of the 34 or 35 years they've been going, they've been involved in finals campaigns for 24 years of that existence. And you go, that's remarkable, absolutely remarkable when you consider the sides, and I was part of Gold Coast who haven't made a final series. GWS have been in a couple now, and, even Fremantle that have been in a fair time too. The lack of finals opportunities they've had too. So West Coast history in the AFL is remarkable when you think about it.
Yeah, and you were such a big part of that success early days. We're going to get to that in a little bit. It's a long career to get through, as you mentioned to me the other day. But just on the current day, just a little more, to have Hearn and Kennedy re-signed to go around another year. We knew that Gaff was going to stay on, but they're not going to lose anyone from their core next season. Do you feel like they're very much in the hunt, and how important will those veterans be? Oh,
no question. And when you're sort of in that mode of, and where they're at, like the window's well and truly open, you need those senior, that young Nelson, for example, what he's going to learn out off JK is just going to be, enormous. And again, you look at, Geelong are in the window right now. I just remember Tom Hawkins as a young forward coming on the scene with Mooney, Podsiadly ahead of him. So he's playing on that third defender, man. Naturally, JK gets the first, Jack Darling probably gets the second, and, young Nelson gets the third now. So in time, of course, he'll get the second best forward, second best defender like Tommy Hawkins did when Cam Mooney retired. And then 2 or 3 years of that, then all of a sudden Podsiadly leaves. But now Tommy Hawkins has played 5 seasons or had 6 seasons, and now he actually is demanding that best defender. And I think that's the evolution of certainly the West Coast forward line, and some of the good young mids coming in too. They've got such a powerful midfield group. There's some young kids that will be just champing at the bit to have their opportunity and to learn. And I think that's the one thing that you stop to, and I always stop myself at Gold Coast. I said we really only had Campbell Brown and Gary Ablett teaching our boys what premiership success looks like and how to train for that premiership success, if you like. Whereas sides that have that, and I always used to talk about Jager O'Meara too. You grab Jager and throw him down to Hawthorn. Well, Hawthorn are running around with 30 multiple premiership players at training. So that experience just fast tracks these young kids. So for those 2 experienced boys, Herney down back and JK up forward, I think it's some really good pillars. Herney's still playing some great footy. We saw JK come back, and again, probably early days he wasn't as fit as he could and should have been because of his injuries. He got himself fit, and he's still well and truly a match winner, and certainly someone that sides struggle to match up against.
Yeah, Herney's really interesting because that's going to be significant next season. He's on 286 games, so all things being equal, he passes Dean Cox's all-time games record of 290 at West Coast, and will more than likely become the Eagles' first ever 300-game player, which is an amazing achievement. Something I wanted to ask you, Guy, which is, you're the perfect person to ask. You lived through it, the travel playing as an Eagle to the other side of the country and how taxing that is on your body. The narrative has been that it takes years off an Eagles player's life and Dockers players' career. Not years of their life, sorry, of their career, the travel. But these stats are really interesting from Sir Swamp Thing on Twitter, who's the best AFL statistician around. The Eagles have actually had more 200-game players since 1987 than any other club, with over 25. That's quite interesting. And there have only been 37 300-game players in the AFL. And the Eagles are going to have one next year, you would think, with Shannon Hearn. So is the narrative a little bit skewed on how many years it takes off your career as an Eagles player? Or, having lived through it, is it an accurate theory?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you've got to balance that up. And my simple answer would be, look, having lived through it, the executive summary would be to say, I reckon it takes about a year off your career.
Okay.
But what balances that out, of course, is the fact that, I was lucky enough with the group of players that I was able to join, be coached by the coaches we had. We spent 10 years in the finals. So I look back and I've played 25 finals games. So guess what? Yeah. That equates to another year of footy. So it balances itself out, if you know what I mean. But sure. I would, like I used to, and having moved away from West Coast, I worked at Collingwood. Our away trip was at Etihad Stadium, or Marvel Stadium these days. That was our away trip. Essendon was the same. Their away games at the MCG. And so I understood clearly how much it took out of you, because every second week to get on the kite, to fly across, it wasn't like a 30-minute, even in the busy Melbourne state I live in now. I mean, to drive, even for me down in Sydney, to get to the MCG Etihad, at best it's 40 minutes. Well, compare that every second week to we'd leave, we'd train at 8:30 on a Friday morning, and we would lob into Melbourne 4 o'clock. So that was your day. That was prior to a game, and that's to do that every second week. That's most clubs don't do that. Simple, and so that obviously accumulation and that factors has to wear you down at some stage. And as I said, over the course of the year, early days I used to say the first year of travel with West Coast, it was fun and exciting. That was great. Second year was like, here we go again. And then the third and fourth year was to just hit the auto play button and away you go. You get into that. So, I mean, it doesn't, you don't sit there, in your third and fourth years with your head in your hands. You just get on with it. You just do it. That's your lifestyle. That's the career. This is who I'm playing for, and this is what it's needed to play in the AFL competition. You get on with it. But over the course of time with travel and all that, recovery, these boys, in Melbourne are back at home with ice bags on them, and we haven't flown past Adelaide yet. So you can't say it's the same, but that's what you have to do, and that's fine. So physically speaking, it has to take an edge off your career. And I know I would think, and I'm only guessing, but I think it's a year. But to balance all those numbers up, you say, well, I played 25 games, in the final series, so that's another year really of football. Herney would be the same too, given the success West Coast had with him. I'm sure he'd be up to at least 15 to 20 finals games, I'd think. So, so to have all those 200 gamers doesn't surprise me, given the success West Coast have had, post the home and away season.
Well explained. A question without notice: who was the most annoying plane partner then, or travel partner?
Clearly David Hart. I want to say annoying, but annoying in a good way. It was humorous. He used to break the ice, literally. He'd go up when, I'll sort of start at the back before I go forward. But flying home, for example, we've had a good win, which we didn't often, obviously, early days of West Coast. But when we started to become good around those early to mid-90s, we'd be all sitting back and we'll be trying to sneak a drink in, so Mick and the coaching staff didn't know about it. But, all the coaches in those days used to all sit up the front and all the players down the back and all that sort of stuff, so we could sneak a few in. And then, David Hart would have a couple under his belt and, we'd egg him on a little bit, but he'd go up and Mick would be fast asleep in his chair at 1A, and Jufy used to go up, and he had a nickname of Bushy because of his moustache. And we'd see Juf walk up and he'd be egging him on, you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it. And he'd walk straight up to Mick, turn around and say, so how well did I play today, Bushy? And we'd just be, sitting, just killing ourselves laughing and hiding under the chairs, waiting for Mick to tear strips off Juf. And, to Mick's credit, because we'd won, he said, you're lucky we won today, Juf. Now go back to your chair, all that sort of stuff. But he was obviously good in that sense. But the old be getting a massage on the bench prior to a game, and there'd be a nice finger swipe of deep heat go all over your body, while you're face down getting a massage, and so all of a sudden you have these bloody hot flushes all over your body, and you'd be cracking gags before game. And look, he actually got quite a bit nervous before games. I think it was his way of sort of calming himself down before the game. But I said he was annoying in a very good way, I must say. But if there's a prank going on, Juf was certainly behind it.
Should we feather the nest, Garby?
Let's do that. We've got a question for just after feathering the nest, which is, I'll give you some time to think about it, Guy, while you're answering the questions. From Cam Gowder, the youngster you had high hopes for that never quite kicked on. So really like the listener questions. And this one we'll get to in a moment, but let's do some feathering the nest first. Drewy, you can take it away.
Yeah, Guy, we've got a list of questions who we put to all the guests that come on the Nest podcast. So we'll start with your favourite Eagles player of all time.
Oh, now, before we go on to, I got one for both of you fellas. Now, my mother is the only person that calls me Guy. Please call me Bluey. Okay.
Yep.
Every time I get called Guy, I'm normally in trouble. So my favourite Eagle, did you say?
Yeah, favourite Eagle ever. Please, Bluey.
Well, I mean, it's hard. And actually, we got the 92-94 reunion coming up this Saturday, unfortunately, at Perth races, but I won't be able to get back there given quarantine. So it's hard to put a finger on the one that stands out for me. So I've gone very soft and gone the 92 and 94 squads of players because
Louis.
we won the two flags.
That's a shame you're missing the reunion. That'll be a cracker.
Yeah, well, I missed the last two. Last year, my boy's a bit of an athlete over here. He's picked up some speed from somewhere. So he was running in some athletics tournaments over here, so I had to miss that for last year. And then obviously this year, given Victorians have been a little bit naughty washing their hands and whatnot, we've had to stay inside. And so for me to get back, and obviously 2 weeks over there, given I sort of work in the cricket space now, it's a busy time of year, so I can't get back, unfortunately. So it should be, and it always is a great day. Amazing.
Feathering the nest question 2. Your best other player, so someone who wasn't necessarily a star, and you've gone with the whole squad for 92 and 94, but give us someone you just loved playing with or loved watching that perhaps didn't grab the headlines.
Well, I'll have to say Mickey Dunstan. Because Mick was so fearsome as a coach, and we used to call Mickey the flavour. We used to call him strawberry and spearmint and choc chip and all that sort of stuff. And only because of the fact that if Mick came out and gave the team a spray during training, and Mickey played a few games at West Coast, it was always on Mickey. Mickey Dunstan just copped it all the time. And seriously, it was like we almost had to wear the black armbands after Mickey got the chop for the year, because we all looked around at each other at pre-season and thought, who's Mick going to pick on now? Mickey was like our flak jacket, because we knew if Mick blew the whistle, you could see steam coming out of his ears, we'd all just sort of get there and herd and push Mickey Dunstan up the front, because he was the one Mick was going to have a crack at. I mean, he'd have a crack at everyone, mind you, but Mickey, for some reason, whether it was his stature and just that lovable sort of face about him, but he'd just find his way in front of Mick's glare, and he used to cop it every time. So Mickey Dunstan was one, because he was the human flak jacket for the rest of us.
It's interesting you say that, because Scott Cummings on the podcast last week said that he thought that the biggest spray that Mick Malthouse ever gave out was to Michael Dunstan, ever.
He wasn't at West Coast when I heard Stephen Jackson cop one of the best I've ever heard. That was during a game at Waverley, and he said, he peeled the paint off the wall that day. It was brilliant, mind you.
So favourite goal, either by you or a teammate?
I kicked 27. They were all match sealers in my career, of course. I know you boys didn't want to bring that up, and we probably don't have time to go through them all, but I remember kicking this banana. I got actually knocked out, moved forward, and I kicked this one. I thought the banana, the ball was actually going to get wedged between the posts, because it was that fine angle. But anyway, the goal that stands out for me was it was the goal. I reckon we were 2 goals down, so it was maybe only fourth or fifth goal. But it was our second last one. Tony Evans, he kicked 2 just before half time in the 92 grand final. But the first one he picked off from a kick-in, I think, from Kenny Hinkley, and kicked it because it was sort of an arm wrestle to that stage. And we were, as I said, we were 4 goals down, that's right. 4 goals down, and he kicked the last 2 before half-time, but that first one was just all of a sudden, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and said, oh, hang on, we're still a chance here. And then we got that second one, and so we went in 2 goals down, but at half-time, I remember Mick talking to us, a while after the game, of course, he said, the difference between half-time at 92 grand final compared to 91 was so stark, it was unbelievable. And, I felt that even out in the ground just before half-time. I knew we were a chance when the little piglet certainly kicked the first of his 2, but nailed that next one to put us 2 down.
I mean, one of the unluckiest players when it comes to the Norm Smith medal, I think, ever, Tony Evans. Like, if Matera doesn't kick 5, he's a lock for that medal. that year. He had such a good game, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, he did. And like we used to call him, hard as a cat's head, a little piglet. He couldn't move too quick, but get him around a contested footy and he'd bite and scratch and find a way to win the ball. And he was just so good. And he was one of those unique ones. I mean, he'd probably get pinged a lot these days. He used to slide in because he wasn't super quick. But he could slide in, pick the ball up in one motion and then feed out a beautiful handball to our runners, And as you say, hard done by the Norm Smith. But when you think about it, Peter Matera had 8 shots on the wing in a grand final. He kicked 5-3.
Incredible.
Summer kicked 6 goals. That's 6-1. So he had his kicking boots on Summer. But Peter Matera 5-3 off a wing. It was a remarkable performance.
Incredible. An Eagles moment that weirdly sits with you. So something that might be a bit abstract, Bluey, but something that really sits with you from your time.
Well, not abstract. It probably says a lot about this player. But in the drawn final, against Collingwood out at Waverley, we suffered all that. When you talk about travel, we'd gone backwards and forwards. I think we played the last 2. Back in those days, we'd spent we'd play 2 games at home, 2 games away, and then on the road for the final. So we'd spent 6 weeks away, just about. Anyway, and you talk a bit about what Collingwood have just done, beating West Coast, mind you, this season, and then travelling back to Queensland and getting their pants pulled down, so to speak. Well, we all know different. So we got to that drawn final and we were sort of looking around, what do we do? Here we go again. We're going to have to get on the bus, back to the airport, fly home, do all that stuff again. And then, sort of 5-6 seconds after the siren had gone, there's Dwayne Lamb doing cartwheels down the ground and going, woo, jumping for joy and looking around and what's the matter with you, Fatty? What? The third umpire's come out. There's, we've actually won, have we? No. And let's be honest, Fatty was careful with his money, shall I say. He was just jumping for joy because he said, well, we get another match payment now. We just, what? Is that all you can think about 5 seconds after the grand final? What, you're going to get another match payment? Because in the good old days, you used to get obviously a retainer and match payments. And so naturally in the course of a season, if you're playing finals, you're not expecting to play in a drawn final to come back. So he was just jumping for joy for another. I think it would have been about $1,250 back in the day. Yeah.
Can you remember your first game, Bluey?
Fairly vividly, actually. Down at Cardinia Park against Robbie Scott and Sean Denham, who I think went on to play for Essendon as well. Mm-hmm. And, lessons, you learn through your career and your life, of course. And the lesson I learned then was I remember Jeff Miles, who I played at Claremont, and he got drafted in the first year of Eagles, a hard, tough, ex-Victorian had come over and played. And he was playing on Jeff Lindner for the Cats as the full forward at the time. And I sort of half got my arm around doing everything right in your first game, as you do as a young kid, and down at Cardinia Park and sort of dewy conditions, and they've gone up for this mark. And Joffrey, I just saw him cock his, and if he punched the ball, he'd almost burst the bladder. If not, the ball would go 20 metres at his, and he could fight too. He's a good boxer, so he had this natural spoiling timing, if you like. Anyway, he sunk his fist into this ball, and at that moment, I saw Bruce Lindner's hands go up around the ball. I'm thinking, I better start going off to the crumb. And sort of as I've done that, I heard the whistle. I've sort of turned around, and as I've turned around, there's Bruce Lindner getting up with the ball. And I'm just going, what? How's he marked that? I mean, Joffa Miles has just got a huge piece of that ball. Surely that should have been going off into the atmospheres, but I stopped there and I just thought, okay, so this is what they talk about the VFL just being this other stronger, tougher, faster game of football. And that was, I said, it was about the first 2 or 3 minutes of the game. So that was a quick grounding about what, my life as a new AFL footballer or VFL footballer back then was going to be.
Just for those listening, that was 1988, Bluey, you made your debut. And that was a win.
Yeah. And then the other part of that first game, so I'm pretty sure we won.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yeah. And came off there, which was fantastic. And they had the old chicken wire across the race as you walk off. And, young kid and, all excited, and we're coming off and bouncing around, and, the crowd's giving it to us, boo, having to go at the umpires and walking off. And, all of a sudden you're under the chicken wire, so you're sort of feeling half safe, and all of a sudden, boom, big splash of fluid hit my head. I've been running around for sort of 2 hours, and curiosity takes over, and you're walking off and fluid's running down my head and down the side of my face. I thought, stick out my tongue and have a little try of that. And so I sort of, doing this one. And at that stage, I get this whack from my back. And I thought, who's that? And it was, strangely enough, it was Joffa, experienced player, played in Victoria, for Collingwood and all that sort of stuff. He says, "Hey, now, Blue, I wouldn't be tasting that if I was you." And I sort of turned around and say, "Oh, no, I wasn't." And I must say it tasted very salty and it was warm. And sort of afterwards, we sort of walked into the room and I've grabbed him, and before the song I said, "Well, why shouldn't I be trying that?" And he said, "Well, Bluey, I know you probably thought it was their beer they were tipping on you, but they use those beer cans for other things." And I just thought, okay, right. Yeah. So from then on, every time at Cardinia Park, he says if we won the game, I'd walk off with an umbrella on my head just in case. But suffice to say, the local brewery down there, a very warm and salty beer, let's put it that way.
Talk about the good old days. I mean, there's so many listeners now who probably wouldn't have envisaged footy could exist like that once upon a time. It's changed so much, and we'll get into some of that in a moment. Brilliant stories. Our biggest tantrum, part of Feathering the Nest. You've pretty much answered that, I think, with Stephen Jackson and the biggest spray that's ever been given. So before we get on to Bluey's career, Drewy, let's get on to that listener question from Cam Gowder, which is a ripper. The one youngster that you had high hopes for at the club that just didn't quite eventuate the way in which you would have liked. There's so many candidates. I mean, Ashley Sampi's a big one, I think. 2001 Super Draft, pick 6, stupid talent. Like, you could see he had it all, but just didn't quite kick on, I think. From a personal point of view, Tommy Swift and Jackson Crabb I had high hopes for. I always thought Jackson Crabb would be a good, top-level Eagles player. Didn't quite make it. The one, for me, my nomination is David Antonowitz, because I remember he came across as, I think, like a 17-year-old Bluey. He did high school, I'm pretty sure. He's in Perth, and he's in year 12. He was given the number 4. He was the next Peter Sumich. Wasn't an early draft pick, but they invested a lot of time into him and just didn't quite kick on to be the player that we would have liked. So David Antonowitz, my nomination, boys.
Louis, hit us.
Yeah, no, a couple of good ones there. Yeah, Tono. And again, unfortunately, these kids, and there's a myriad of early choices from all clubs and first-round picks and all that sort of stuff, and even number 1 picks of the draft. But unfortunately, that's what the recruiters put on them. So sometimes you go back, well, what were you thinking, recruiters? This boy is, he might athletically look really good, but, he, how much homework did you do? Certainly from David's point of view, moving away from Victoria, well, he might be just a homebody, for example. Mm. So he might have been a superstar back in Victoria. You just never know. So I do think it has to be balanced up. But the one for me was Clancy Rutherford, who, again, you mentioned Crabby. Crabby would be another one from Claremont too, where I went back to coach Claremont, and I was looking forward to having Crabby as my captain that season. Round 1, he blew his knee, and we lost him for the season. But Clancy Rutherford, and if you can remember Clancy, he was, I think, one of the first players to write out the old letters out to all the clubs to say, don't even consider recruiting me because I'm desperate to get. I think West Coast, I think Fremantle weren't up at that stage, but I want to play for West Coast, so don't even bother recruiting me because I'll find my way home as quick as I possibly could. So, so he was one of the first to do that, but I'd seen him close and obviously followed Claremont. Saw him come up through Claremont, just a hard work. He was a quicker version of Tony Evans really too. Like, he was just hard as a cat's head at the contest, and probably that was his undoing. He just couldn't see the game outside of that. And I remember I just retired, moved into the coaching, and they're obviously asking me, which of your teammates do you rate really highly? And, I think he was rated by all the other coaches, out of the squad of whatever we had, about 40, though. He was sort of like 30 to 40, of course, and I had him in the top 10. And they just kept asking me, Bluey, how have you got this kid in the top 10? I said, well, mate, if you know him like I know him, he's just, he's just everything you want. He's hard-working, he crosses his T's, dots his I's, and, studies the opposition, all that sort of stuff. But clearly there was just that missing link, if you like, for taking that next step up, which a lot of players do. I mean, you mentioned the numbers of, 200 game players and stuff like that. I think, or even back then, I think it was 7% of the first round draft picks play over 100 games. 7%. I mean, it's not big, we still know that I think the career average of an AFL footballer is just ticked over 4. It's like 4.1 last I looked. So you go, if you play 4 years, that's 80 games at best, or 88 if you play everyone, which we all know that first and second year players don't play every game. It's a rarity, So, but anyway, yeah, Clancy Rutherford. I want to say disappointment, but I just thought he had everything going for him. But for some reason, whether it was the players ahead of him or, he was a very smart kid too. So maybe he was torn between the the education side of it, or scholastic career versus a footy career as well.
So my nominations, I would consider it a bit left field, but it's Brad Smith, who we drafted at the end of 2004, I reckon, and he'd kicked 100 goals, I think, in the Waffle the previous 2 seasons, and then he did his ACL in both pre-seasons of his 2-year contract. So that was around that time where I guess Quinton Lynch ended up being a premiership full forward, and he kicked 70 goals in the 2006. But at that stage, he wasn't necessarily locked in as our number one man. I think he spent some time down back as well. Obviously, we know what happened with trying Michael Gardner in that role in the finals in 2005. And Brad Smith, I think, was seen as a bit of a left field pick for us that maybe could do something, mature age. Doing his ACL twice, that you can't get more unfortunate than that. I think both times he was just sort of twisting and turning at training. And then he ended up getting delisted, and West Coast made an application to the AFL to be able to rookie list him. And the rookie listing rules at that time were quite strict. And because he'd been on the senior list, he didn't qualify to be a rookie. And every club said, no, you can't do it. And I guess it was because of West Coast's success or something like that. But I always felt that it was such a shame for him that he didn't get a chance at the big time. And I think he went on to then kick 100 goals in the Waffle again after he'd been delisted by West Coast. So what could have been potentially for Brad Smith?
Yeah, great nomination. So Cam Gowder, who gave us that question, which is excellent, he put forward Travis Gasper, which is a good one. I think Trav Gasper was pick 11, I'm pretty sure. Played in the grand final, but had lots of injury problems, so couldn't quite get it going. Andrew McDougall, I'm sure Eagles fans will mention quite prominently in this discussion. Pick 5 in the draft, but the body just never quite got going for AFL level. Maybe mentality as well, who knows. But give us your nominations on Twitter, Facebook. The youngster you had high hopes for that didn't quite crack it. It's a good discussion point. Let's get into your career though, Guy McKenna, because you are a youngster that went on to do great things for the West Coast Eagles, thankfully, along with so many others. It's an amazing resume, as I read out before. Those early stages, things went on a level, obviously, when Mick Malthouse came to the club. What can you remember from that time? You were there in 89, John Todd, then Malthouse comes in 1990. How quickly did it change to take the Eagles up so many levels, and what were the reasons for it?
Well, I think, credit to, I wasn't there under Ronnie in the first year, of course, 87, but yeah, Toddy for 2 years, and we played finals that very first year, so that was all new and exciting in a Final 5 system, I'm pretty sure. Which was fantastic, a great opportunity. And then, next year, I think we were 2-13 with 7 games to go, and we won 5 of the last 7, upset a few clubs and to win 7 games. So we'd gone from sort of Hollywood to the local farmers market, if you like, in the car park. It was appalling, and 7 games. But Toddy, to his credit, I'd call him a character coach, because what he did was sort out the ones that were prepared to, step up, if you know what I mean. You either step up or you step back, or you hold your line. There's probably 3 types, if you like. And Toddy was about trying to find out the levels of those fellas, and I think he did that to a degree in his own unique way, mind you. He'd set some physical challenges and mental challenges. He'd throw a couple of cut lunches too if he had to at quarter time, just to get some players buy-in and attention almost at times. Quite unique, I'll say that. But, you don't coach 800 games of certainly waffle footy and AFL footy if you're a mug, that's for sure. So he was a great character coach, which was, I think, a really good formation at West Coast, and whether they needed it at the time, who knows. But then Mick came in because, I used to tell people, I'd say to you fellas too, I'd say to Toddy, I'm playing on Gary Ablett Senior, for example, this week. And he said, well, have you seen the winners on the weekend? Because that was our view of the opposition, was an hour show on the ABC back in those days was the winners. But you're only hoping, because they only used to show 2 games, so you only got a choice of 4 teams. So being shown, well, good luck to you. But you got Gary Ablett this week. The following year, Mick comes in. Well, Mick Mick could tell you what Gary Ablett Senior, because of the opposition and his information and his scouts in Victoria, he could tell you what he ate on Wednesday, how he trained on Wednesday night, what colour underpants he's probably wearing. He had a nickname of a god, of course, so he could obviously tell you what part of the Bible he was up to and all that sort of stuff. Mick would get into a bit of humour at times, but his understanding of and then that's an individual. Then obviously collectively, it was just like this. It was like going from primary school straight to university. His knowledge on the opposition and their players and how you could exploit that potentially was enormous. So the upswing in that, and on the back of Toddy finding out who could and who wasn't, who was prepared to pay the price, so to speak, and who wasn't. He'd sorted that out, and then Mick came in, added that layer of professionalism, if you like, and this is what's needed, and started to train us because Toddy obviously knew Western Australian footy really well. Had seen Victorian and VFL and had surrounded himself with players of that ilk, but had never coached in that, had never had played in that himself. So he wasn't aware of what the Victorian brand of football needed, and us Western Australians were very skillful and, fair to say, outside. And that's how we play. So we play on these massive big grounds, and that's what you needed to play well over there, whereas the Victorians are a lot smaller, more congested, more for their contested ball, and Mick understood that. So our drills, although he'd still work on our expansive game, he started to work very, very clearly on, one, getting us a lot stronger to absorb all that physical punishment. So again, his smartness, although he wanted to work on that, the inside grunt ball, he knew you needed some weight and muscle to absorb that. So I'd argue we trained more in the gym than we did actually out in the oval in mixed pre-season. And so that's why, we went from skinny little kids. Mind you, Woosha joined 87, so Mick joined 90. It's 3 years. So you talk about a physical a platform, if you like, or a base. I mean, that was all of a sudden these little measles turned into mumps, and these mumps turned into muscles, and all of a sudden, we grew into men almost, and so it was a perfect timing for Mick to join us. But the level of professionalism went to another level, and our understanding of how to play the Victorian brand allowed us to compete more consistently on the Eastern Seaboard, which then obviously led to some success.
How did your game evolve under Mick, Bluey? And I guess for those listening that didn't get to see you play in your prime, what was he like as a coach for you?
Well, we were probably at two different viewpoints of how my game was, that's for sure. Well, I played a season under Gerard Neesham at Claremont, and we had a fantastic season in 1987. And he had the sort of water polo. He's probably he should be coaching now, Gerard, because in this modern game of run, draw, press, all that sort of stuff, he'd come out of that water polo school, and that's what he instilled in us at Claremont. And I came out of a year of having won 19 games, drew one and lost one, and won a grand final by 72 points. So as a young, snotty-nosed 18-year-old that thinks he knows it all, I clearly didn't. And what he was able to teach us, and dry out all those moistness, if you like, behind the ears, it was fantastic. So to describe myself probably as a player as a fairly loosey-goosey and cutting off the angles type, well, that wasn't going to cut it early days with Mick. And even with Toddy, when I moved into West Coast, he was very much, no, it's one-on-one here and it's da-da-da-da-da. So a little bit of that, and I still try to play my way. I think Toddy dropped me actually in one game and to teach me a lesson and all that sort of stuff, which was fantastic. And then Mick came in, and so he didn't stymie that. He never sort of probably rewarded me for doing that, but encouraged it. But he probably encouraged me more about playing and then working off my opponent. I'd probably go with the mindset of, no, I'm just going to start working off him straight away. And Mick sort of honed my game into, no, let's just start from 50-50. As I said, I'd probably start with a 60-40 mindset. I'm going to sit off this bloke from ball one. Mick said, no, come on, let's just see the opening ball. You put in a cricket terminology. Let's just see the opening ball. Let's get in behind the ball, all that sort of stuff, rather than dancing down the wicket and having a clip and trying to clip him over the, like T20 style, over the bowler's head. So Mick certainly wound me back a bit, but then, would obviously once the game got up and going, would let us go. So, he was fantastic, certainly for me as a young player to have that side of the games, because, again, the modern game says you just sit in the zone and you don't have to play on anyone. But as we can see, when those really good players like Caleb Daniel got taken to the goal square with Geary, the St Kilda captain, all of a sudden he gets found out, because that's what you miss, and that's what Mick was very quick to teach us Western Australians about. It starts on the body, then you work off them. It doesn't work the other way around, because by the time if you've sat off them early, his argument with it could be 3 or 4 goals down, you're never going to make that time up. Yep. So start on them, respect them, find out what you can and can't do on them, and then grow your game from there. And as I said, it certainly helped my game flourish. That's certainly in the AFL.
And that half back line was just, legendary. I mean, whenever anyone does their all-time Eagles side, it's McKenna, Jakovic, Worsfold, and then build the rest around them. And you had other great defenders in that team as well. I mean, Michael Brennan, as underrated an Eagle potentially as has ever been at fullback, Ashley McIntosh, obviously, and champion of the game and the club. But what was it about that half back line that was so special? Apart from the individual brilliance, why did you synchronise so well as a unit?
Well, I know it's probably a cliche for the modern game, but I have to say it was the fact of the pressure of the fellas up the ground and what Mick had still done. Now, I'm forgetting the forwards because they just never tackle and chase. They still don't, even in today's footy. But certainly our midfield, we had Fatty Lamb running around as a tag, Donny Pike almost doing another tag. Dean Kemp, even although he was such a maestro with the ball in hand, he would still, defend really hard as a midfielder. So you had those, and the rucks would be ruck on ruck. And then 2 of the all-time great wingers for West Coast as well, in Chris Mainwaring, who I used to call the 7th defender, because I used to say he probably was picking up my man half the time, because as he led up the ground, Maney would drop back in the hole, and then I'd try and run off Maney, and Peter Matera as well, who ended up down back as well. But he was so good, and we talked about the 5 goals, 3 in the grand final. But my favourite moment for Peter Matera is him almost emerging as a player, because how many times would the opposition break off half back, break off through the midfield and be running towards our goals and get dragged down from behind by Peter Matera, who's chased him, and almost in that motion of tackling him, strip him of the ball up on his feet, and he'd be running straight back the other way. And so, I would say that was like the 7th man or the 8th man for our defence. So we were lucky that most of the balls that came into our back 50 were on our terms, not the opposition's terms, because of that pressure up the ground. But, yeah, certainly playing alongside Jacko. And in those days with the old, I call it the 6, 6 and 6 days, when you had centre forwards and full forwards and pockets and flanks, we knew, like in the Carey days and those forwards. And you mentioned Michael Brennan. And if I can spend a minute on Bernard, as we call him, Michael Bernard Brennan, he did. I mean, underrated, but he played on the bet, that era of Lockett and Ablett and all the, Dunstall, 13, there's 25, almost 3,000 odd goals. 4,000 goals that, those 3 forwards and Salmon as well. And you throw those forwards in, Kernahan he had to play on, and he almost goes unnoticed. But his career was playing on the best, if not the 2nd best forward every week. Every week. There's no weekends off. Every week, Whereas I must say, my role on the side, a lot of the time was to pick up the sixth forward, if you like. But, Michael Brennan was always the full forward. It was the gun forward every week, So he had no weekend off, and he would give it to us as hard as anyone too, because if all of a sudden the ball was getting into his full forwards' hands and chest a little bit easy, he'd be giving us a wind-up, that's for sure. But, certainly the unique, chemistry that Jacko and Wisher had and myself had was quite unique. I always describe it to people. I said, well, you get to know these people, you spend so much time around them. It's just think about this. You're in a contested situation. The ball's running towards the boundary line. There's Glenn Jakovic screaming out over your ear. You're about to pick this ball up. You've got some pressure coming. And the first thing you'll hear is, Bluey, you're hot. I'm free. Give me a handball. So, yep, off you go. And you just turn a handball because you know where Jack's going to be. If that's John Worsfold in the same situation, you're picking up the ball, you're under pressure from behind, the first thing you hear is, Bluey, take a bounce, you're clear. And you sort of, what? Hang on, I can feel this pressure coming. But the next thing you hear is this slap of the feet. And all of a sudden, and then the next thing you hear is a rattle of the fence, because there's 2 bodies that just gone smashing into the fence. And I said that was the chemistry. You just knew, If you had the ball around Woosha, he wasn't about receiving the ball. He's about inflicting some physical pain on the opposition. If it was Jacko, he was a bit like myself. He liked the ball in hand, so he'd be running off into space and creating, if you like, ahead of his time down the field. So it was a unique group. Ash McIntosh, he had this, very laconic way, but he was super quick, super competitive. Just get a hand in when you had to. He had some beautiful skills on his left. He could use his right, but didn't have to because he was so quick. And then David Hart, who had that, he had great endurance and great power. And for a little fella, could get off the ground. We didn't see a lot of his high marking, but he could roost the ball over a distance. And he could run and break the line. He could also kick through a line as well. So it was a good blend of six, but I do say the seventh and eighth defender up the ground certainly helped us.
We want to talk about the flags and the successful era, but there's a thread there which I cannot pull on. I can't not pull on it. John Worsfold, his attack on the man, the hits that he laid, but they're in AFL folklore, but you were probably, metres away from a few of them. What are the ones that stick in your mind, and also more memories of playing with Woosha?
Yeah, well, and again, that would be the scene of the biggest fights I've ever seen in football too. Not against the opposition, that would be Michael Brennan and Woosha before a game. Because Monkey, again, was playing on Dunstall, but he just knew after 3 or 4 seasons of playing with Woosha's going to go out and try and pick a fight with Jason Dunstall and stir him up. And so if he thought he was going to have a flat game, or Dunstall's going to fire up and kick 6 now because he just wants to prove a point to Woosha. So Monkey and Woosha would almost punch on before a game because Monkey would be saying, don't say a word to Dunstall. Don't say a word to Gary Ablett. Don't say a word to Tony Locke. I've got to play on him. Just you do your job up the ground. And so you could, sure enough, and it was almost like poking the bear. It was quite unique. But, yeah, Woosha, as I said, he as pharmacist, and, we're obviously really, really close and good mates still and all that sort of stuff. And he'd be one of the softest men, not softest, but in a nice way off the field. But he'd cross that line and it was almost like there's blue and yellow in one eye. I can see that. Good teammates, tick, right? Nothing to worry about there. Right, what are these other colours? Right, I don't like this. I don't know what's going on there. And and so just that sickening smash of meat and skin when it hits, it was just, it's just, as I said, I can still hear some of those hits. I think the Graham Wright one at Victoria Park springs to mind. The Dunstall one, I think I almost had to see the physio after I heard it because it was like the ball had just crossed the line and Dunstall had got up from memory I think I was walking back to pick up the ball at Subiaco.
Was that Dermy or Dunstall?
Dermot, sorry, yeah. And he stood up and then I just heard this sickening thud, It was seriously like I've actually been hit by a car, so I sort of know what that thought is. It wasn't a bad accident, but certainly know that. And I turned around and I think there's not a car on the ground. It was Woosha ploughing into Dermot. And I just saw, and the ball had stopped as well. I'm thinking, what the hell's going on, But it was just him. It was like the dog at the park. He just wanted to know he's the king dog on this ground. It would be fair to say most players grew certainly a foot taller, knowing that Woosha was running around playing on his team. I do tell a story as you get older and you get wise and all those sorts of things about Woosha because, in his heyday now, in his youth, if someone was blueing with Chris Lewis or Brett Heddy at our half-forward line, he'd run and leave his man. Woosh, what are you doing? Come on, the game's going on. But he'd run off half-back and go down to half-forward and start tangling with that bloke. But as he got a bit older, maybe wiser, a bit slower, couldn't run out the games like he used to. So what he'd start doing, if someone was blueing at half-forward for us, or the half-back was picking on our half-forward, Brett Heddy or Chris Lewis, Woosh would then turn around and just start grappling his half-forward. Everyone would be saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? He said, well, you tell him to stop and I'll stop. Simple. But that's how he's in his latter years, if you want to put it that way. But, he was, I think, a captain at 23, 23 or something. And, fantastic leader, physically for us. As I said, it's a wonder I'm not bored because, we were close mates. I sort of only knew him through Teal Cup, of course. I always tell him that as a bottom-age boy, I started on the ground, mate. You and your Croatian mate, Peter Sumic, had to start on the bench. So you South Manor Blake still can't play. Anyway, so I didn't know a lot of him, but when we had to do the old man on man and kick the ball up, it was always me had to go with Woosha, because I think all the teammates thought he'd be the one that wouldn't want to whack me on the head. But that was like the magpie swooping, going across your head every time you go up for a mark. So I knew fairly clearly and fairly early on what all the other half forwards must be thinking about when they got to play on Woosha, that's for sure.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so the flags, Bluey, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint a specific question about them. So just talk us through the emotion of winning them and the things you recall more than anything else, I guess, when it comes to those flags in 92 and 94. And one specific question on them, the parties. Give us some insight on that, the post-flag parties. But, yeah, just the flags in general and just what they mean to you.
When do these podcasts go live? Are these 8:30 afterwards? I mean, what sort of story would you like?
That's the beauty of our podcast. They're free for all.
I got a fairly a reasonably clean one, but it sort of depicts a lot about the group, I suppose. But you boys, just looking at you two fellas on the Zoom here, a bit too young, but obviously the America's Cup in 83.
83, sorry, 83.
83, yeah, 87 in Perth, I think. Yeah. So you boys probably weren't even born then. So I remember my father, who wasn't a great yachty, but because of Australia and the success of 132 years, the Cup had never left America. So here, the lessons we learned in 91, not going over to the parade, the pressure cooker. Only I think Mick could speak, no one else could speak because he didn't want any secrets and all that sort of stuff going out. So what we learned from that, the experience of these boys, the Hawthorn boys stepping up at three-quarter time when I thought was still a chance, even 10 points down, kicking into a 3-goal breeze. I still thought we were a good chance. But then Brereton and Dunstall, Platten, Tuck, all these blokes, Deere went to another level. Pritchard, we just couldn't go with them. And I remember walking off that ground just thinking, so that's when people talk about experience. That's what they're talking about. These blokes sort of had us arm wrestled and then just went to another level. And we didn't have that other level to go to. So 92, we came over early, went to the parade. We could speak to who we wanted to speak to, all the learnings in 91. And then, as I said before about little Piggy Evans kicking those two at half-time. I mean, Mick told us that story about half-time at Hawthorn in 91. I was like, he had the foot pump up. He's trying to pump us up and get us going for the second half. Whereas at half-time of 92, he reckons he had the fire hose on, squirting us all, trying to just calm us down. Because that's what those two goals that Piggy Evans had kicked just before half-time, I think we all of a sudden, and we were all talking about, we can't, we're in this position this time last year, it's not going to happen again, and all the things we were going to do, which we actually ended up doing, won us that flag in 92, and it was the first cup. We're the first interstate team to take it out of Victoria. So that was the emotion in it for me. And again, the realisation, and again, maybe I should have answered this in that question around what's the weirdest thing that stays in your mind. I often talk about people, the Western Australian folk, Chardonnay set and all that sort of stuff they get thrown at, and they know everything and all that sort of stuff. Well, I tell you what, as far as passion goes, and they get because of that's why they get labelled those labels, if you like, the West Australians. But passion was a lesson I learned out of the 92 grand final, because I think we faced the Southern Stand. We got our medals or awards, and then you do sort of three-quarter laps. So you go up to punt road, so it's three-quarter lap by the time you get down to the city end. So this is, 10, 15 minutes, well and truly. Peter Matera's got his Norm Smith. We've all got our medals and all that sort of stuff. So, 15 is probably a bit longer, 25 minutes. So passion comes to mind because we get down to the city end, and up on that first level, not ground level, but up on that first level, about the first two rows back, in that 2 blocks, there was about 2 blocks. There's about 25 of them, 13 in the front row or 12. I remember counting them, There's 25 Geelong supporters still there, standing up, and they were just giving us some signs. They were giving us language like I've never heard before. Some of the words, the swear words, I'm still trying to work out what they were. They were sitting there. They were still giving it to us. And I remember, and it was Woosha of all people. He came past me and said, "Woosh, have a look at this. Have a look at these people up there." Jacko was waving the cup around. He'd taken it off to him because he thought he owned it. And I'm looking at Woosha. We were just cacking ourselves. And there was these 25-odd Geelong supporters just still giving. I said, "Mate, now that's passion. We've just taken the cup off them. We've taken the cup off Victoria. And they've paid their $130 to come and watch, unfortunately, their side lose. And they are just giving it to us." I said, I was almost I wanted to go up and hug him, but I dare say I may not have ever come back if I did. But that was passion, and that was certainly a great moment for the club, having obviously lost in '91. Quickly, the party, the one that spread. So that was enormous. I think Fatty Lamb. These days, of course, you wouldn't. Well, you're not even allowed out of the state, so it wouldn't happen. It was rumoured. I never saw it, but enough people have told me that he actually held the cup and went through the X-ray machine. So we actually held the cup, got on the conveyor belt. Come on, mate. We just, blah, blah, blah. Someone was, hugging the security, so he didn't even see it, to his credit. So that's folklore. Apparently, he actually held the cup. He wasn't going to let it go, and he went through the X-ray machine. Probably explains why he's the way he is these days. Anyway, Perth, and the lining of, obviously you've flown into Perth before and gone out to Subiaco. The line of people from that airport, it must be 20 odd k's before the poly pipe was built, of course, as we call it. That road was just lined with people before, the thousands of people at Subiaco was enormous. But one of the great nights we had was at one of the local drinking holes around Subi. And I forget the song that came on. It must have been, the majority of the group still there. It would have been the second or third day of celebration, mind you. And I reckon it must have been the Sunday. And anyway, this song would come on, and we were number order, of course. So Brett Heady was there, so he came out and strutted and did a dance in front of this whole crowd of just onlookers. We thought that was hilarious. And the next bloke would come in, and Tommy Kemp, number 2, would come up, try and outdo him. All of a sudden, and I think I was 17, so I got up and did my bit. Wasn't that funny? And then Tony Evans, how best do I put this? So we get up and do a dance. We were sort of loosely dressed, if you like, put it that way. Well, Tony Evans just decided, enough was enough, so he just got his drawers, dropped them to the ground, and then straight out with his underpants on, and brought the house down. And as I said, hard as a cat's head, Tony Evans, BP, quiet achiever, all that sort of stuff. He did have he had to have a great deal of sense of humour, because the 18 locker was alongside 17, so he had to get along with me somehow. So he had some humour in him. But when he did that night, it just brought the house down. It was priceless.
Brilliant.
The 92 victory, that was a bit of a grind before, I guess, pulling away a little bit late. But in 94, you guys dominated the Cats. Did you have them mentally on toast by that stage?
92, but I think even it was interesting just obviously what just happened with Collingwood knocking over the West Coast, which you go, geez, So it's that huge mountain to climb for Collingwood that year. And Geelong in that year, 94, did that against Footscray. I think they came from behind to knock off the Western Bulldogs in one of their finals. And then the final before the grand final, the prelim, if you remember that Gary Ablett, I think he had 5 touches for the day, and one of them was the very last one where Tudor kicks that one off his ankle, hits Gary Ablett, who'd been held really quiet by Mickey Martin. He kicks that goal just on the siren or just after it, I think. So physically and emotionally, we just thought that they were spent. They had 2 huge games, similar to Collingwood against West Coast, and they go up and get belted by Geelong this year. We sort of knew that. No one would obviously speak about it, but certainly, I talked to my close mates, Jacko and Woosher and a few others, that Peter Matera, we'd say, geez, I reckon Geelong, but, amongst ourselves, we knew they were still going to come out. It was a grand final, so they're going to get themselves up. It's a grand final. They're going to come hard at us, but we just had to pop the balloon, and which we're able to do. And I think that year, which Mick always talks about, and even the modern day coaching about defence over attack, is we were the most defensive side that year. Geelong were the most attacking side. I think they still hold the record for the biggest score ever kicked in a home and away season. But we ended up kicking our highest score for the season in the grand final, and they kicked their lowest. So it was a great sort of reversal, and sort of you imprint yourself if you're ever going to coach and philosophies and all that sort of stuff. There's a balance, of course, in that, but I always say defence will get, if you get into a grand final, defence will win it to you, but attack will get you in more grand finals, but gives you less chance of winning.
Yeah, how good is Guy McKenna? What a champion of the West Coast Eagles. It's a long interview, a long episode, so we've decided to break it up into 2 parts. for you. Make sure you listen to Part B as well, because there are plenty more great yarns from Guy McKenna's illustrious time with the West Coast Eagles, as well as an in-depth chat between Drew and I on the trades that are being mentioned around our club. A couple of players linked to the Eagles, Zac Langdon, even Patrick Cripps. We'll have a look at that one, and some of the chat around the next captain of the club once Luke Shuey decides his time leading the boys is up. And there's a left field option that has been mentioned. We go into detail on that in Part B of this chat with Guy McKenna on the Nest as well. So make sure you tune in for that one.
This week at Safeway, shop the 10 for $10 produce sale. With the 10 for $10 produce sale, get items like large avocados, mangoes, green, red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, cucumbers, large lemons, or 16-ounce bags of Signature Farms baby-peeled carrots for the member price of just $1 each. Plus, select meats like Signature Farms 80% lean ground beef and Signature Select extra meaty pork loin back ribs are buy one, get one free this week. Hurry in before these deals are gone. Visit Safeway.com for more deals.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.